chapter 11. If a man has a right to find God in his own way, he has the right to go to the devil in his own way also. Hugh Hefner. Satan stalked around, downcast with angry words streaming from his mouth. In his mind, he saw Joe cursing God, defeated. Fearing that God might intervene at any moment, he concocted such a devious plan that he felt success was inevitable. Joe had been lucky. His businesses were crumbling, but he was not completely bankrupt. Satan would be sure he finished the job properly next time. Looking intently, he studied Joe mercilessly. Everyone had faults, and Joe's would lead to his destruction. The next time that the angels gathered, Satan made sure he was there with them. Michael asked, "How are things going with Joe? You've destroyed almost everything he loved, and he still did not change. It appears that he still loves God." Satan sighed. "Joe will only feel pain if he himself is hurting. He will do anything to save his own life. But if Joe had great pain in his own body, he would not love God, nor would he obey him. I challenge you to put him in my hands." "You know the rules of the kingdom. He is already at your mercy," Michael bellowed. So Michael agreed that Satan would be allowed to cause Joe pain. That is, unless Joe himself used his faith in God's word to stop him. Love casts out fear. There was one stipulation God had instructed Michael to convey. You can cause Joe as much pain as you want, but his life is to be spared. His cry of ecstasy and destruction streamed over the expanse of earth onto the shores and into obscure hovels, for the rays of his power had been sent out to accomplish his desire. With that, Satan vanished. Satan took great pleasure as he afflicted Joe. Joe had tried to shake it off, tried to ignore it, but it was there. His palms were sticky with sweat. He felt nauseated. It was dark in his bedroom. The shadows were very black. Behind and above him, black leathery wings quietly positioned themselves. Leering red eyes watched Joe's every move. Here, there, and everywhere, all over the room, in the corners of the ceiling, upon the furniture, clinging like spiders to the walls were the demons, letting out little snickers, some of them knife-like cursing. Hundreds of red eyes watched Joe's every move. There was occasional hacking from the throat of a demon, a short burst of red vapor spewing from its mouth. In his bedroom awaited the most loathsome spirits of all. They watched him lying in bed, never moving from their positions on the ceiling. On command, shrieks rang around the room. Their words exploded like arrows sent straight into Joe's heart. A blinding flash, and then another. Spores of red-hot light traced brilliant fiery arcs, a searing edge that cut through Joe like a sword. Painful sores began to appear on his body. Waves of spirits poured down upon Joe in abominable terror. All strength left his body, and he began to shake uncontrollably. When Nigel arrived, he could see only the eyes. As he scanned the room, straining to see more, it occurred to him that there were more than 20 pairs facing him. He counted the pairs swiftly in his mind. Nigel went pale and drew a deep breath. He looked directly into the eyes of the tallest, most sinister of them. It was impossible to separate his shape from the darkness. A rumble passed down the shadowy line of demons, a low, hissing mutter that echoed about the room. Satan was in the lead, of course, unbelievably huge, black as midnight, a monster straight out of the abyss. At last, Nigel, recognizing them all, matched the vastness with each pair of eyes. The horde was overwhelming. Out of one corner of his eye, Nigel could see that Satan was watching, carefully evaluating him. "What are you doing here?" he cried. "You've been instructed not to kill Joe. Have you forgotten our agreement?" Nigel smiled. Then suddenly Joe was surrounded by 4 heavenly warriors robed in glorious light, their majestic wings unfurled like a canopy over him, their words swirling sheets of brilliance. The air was filled with the deafening cries of hideous spirits spiraling through the roof, leaving a trail of red vapor as they vanished. Their words vaulted through the demons, as though they were clay pigeons used in target practice. The demons began to shy back. Half their numbers were gone, as was half their zeal. Joe fell into a fitful sleep, waking early in the morning with excruciating pain covering his body. And then, almost as suddenly as it had begun, Satan's attack was over. Only 3 little demons remained, ones that might induce continued pain and the spread of the unknown disease, but not death. Michael alighted back in the hallway as his wings folded and the light around him faded. "How's Joe?" Joel asked. Michael was relieved to say, "He's still shaken, but he's all right. He has the will to fight, and the pain is endurable." Returning from the doctor's office, Joe entered the kitchen, giving Grace a sour look. He sighed. "What's wrong? What did they say?" Grace pried. Joe replied, "I didn't understand all the verbiage they were using, but it is obvious they have no idea what is wrong with me. They have run more tests than I care to think about, and there are still no answers. All the doctor could suggest was that I seem overly stressed and that maybe a vacation would do me some good." Grabbing a mug from the cupboard, Joe filled it with the coffee Grace had just brewed. After adding some vanilla creamer, he headed out to the deck to watch the ocean. Why is this happening? What have I done to cause this? Why can't the doctors figure out what's wrong? Why are sadness and depression such ever-present companions? I know there is a time for sorrow and grief. The pain never seems to go away. It just seems to lie there, heavy upon me. Deep and uncontrollable sadness fills my soul. Death of my children is so against the way it's supposed to be. It is so hard to bear. There is no place to put it that makes sense. It seems that I must endure it. I'm just going through the motions of life. I feel I'm wasting away. This pain does not just visit because my children are dead. Everything in my life is dead. My dreams are even broken. I'm powerless to make things better. I don't think I can bear this. My heart is broken, and there isn't anything to make it go away. It is so hard to even think of happiness, let alone experience it. I've carried this too long. There are too many sleepless nights and tearful prayers, and nothing will make it go away. It is all I can do to get up one more day and put my game face on and go through the motions. All I really want to do is be sad. I just want to shut the world out for a while as best I can and just be sad. Friends ask what they can do for me. Just be okay that I'm not okay. It's so exhausting to pretend otherwise because I'm not okay. It just hurts. God, why have you abandoned me? Sadness masked his face. He sat there removing bad bits of skin from his shoulder. Unseen to Joe, 2 angelic beings watched. In their unglorified state, they were of little consolation, except that they made sure that Joe remained alive. Multiple ulcerated skin lesions that were raised and reddish covered his body. His hands appeared more as claws, and if he tried to walk, his left foot dragged. His eyelashes and eyebrow hairs were starting to fall out, and he found it difficult to close his eyelids. With uncontrollable itching, Joe took a small seashell that lay on the table next to him and scraped his arm. At the end of the pier, on top of the roundhouse, like an enormous black dragon, Satan sat. Other demons attended to him, waiting to hear his next command, but Satan was silent. Hour upon hour, a tense scowl on his face, he sat and gazed at Joe with his slowly shifting red eyes. Standing guard around Joe's house, Michael and his angelic hosts could feel the lull, the silence, and the ominous deafness of the atmosphere. It had always been the same throughout the centuries. Grace also indulged in self-pity and anger, enlisting anyone who would listen to her tale. She should have kept her mouth shut. There was no way to explain to others how she felt. But she wanted to keep on talking anyway. She was starved for human conversation because Joe just didn't want to talk about it one more time. She was like a broken record, stuck in one spot, continually repeating itself. Soon the town was full of rumors and malicious gossip. Grace vacillated between wanting to be with friends and wanting to be alone. She couldn't sleep and was delirious at times. She had panic attacks. The attacks seemed to strike out of the blue and without warning. Grace couldn't find any clear reason for the attacks. They occurred when she was relaxing or sound asleep. These panic-induced attacks left her feeling endangered and unable to escape. Because of these fears, she began to avoid things. She dreaded the surge of overwhelming anxiety and fear. Her heart would pound, and she couldn't breathe. At times, she felt like she was dying or going crazy. I wonder what people think after they talk to me. Actually, they must know my life sucks. Life as I know it has fallen apart, and sometimes I hope I won't wake up in the morning. It's not like I want to kill myself. Or do I? I just want out of my life and into someone else's. She felt intimidated just while walking down the street or into a room, and she hated when people pointed her out as that poor woman whose children were murdered, or looked at her out of the sides of their eyes as if she might start babbling any second. Everyone seemed to offend her. No one offered her the mercy she so craved. Grace was tired of that, even pissed off at times. I'm tired of it all. How long am I going to keep bitching and moaning? Get over it. You are better than this. I just need to think about something else, about anything but my children. I don't want to fall asleep frightened by continual nightmares. The blackness is so threatening. I feel so alone. I miss my children. They were my world. How can I ever replace them? Love has died. Sorrow surrounds me. I'm overwhelmed. I'm afraid something else more sinister will happen, although I really can't imagine what it could be. My days are drudgery to be lived out with a hollow heart. Even my muscles ache and have no strength. I'm afraid to call on God, for what other punishment might he have? All my prayers are in vain. I have had too many losses, and my heart can bear no more. My heart is closed. I'm afraid of love. I've tried it, and it hurts too much. Then her chest would go tight and her breath short. Grace developed the perplexing habit of taking her pulse the way a runner might at the end of a race, 2 fingers at the neck, even though she was sitting on the couch, not crossing the finish line of a marathon. The anxiety just whipped out of nowhere, tightening its grip on her heart. As her head went light with it, she gasped. She did this out of the fear that she might be dying. She'd convinced herself it might happen any time, and feeling the steady beat of her heart made her relax. I can't breathe. Get a grip. Think of some happy times. Then her expression tightened, like something painful was attacking her, yet she saw nothing. An apparition stepped forward, a ghastly figure. It was tall, cloaked in billowing wings. It moved so smoothly, so silently, that it seemed to float right up beside Grace. The other demons in the room stopped talking and bowed slightly. The thing looked at Grace with calculating eyes. Its face was entirely hideous, especially its bulging eyes. It was pure evil, filled with hate. Forebodin's face mirrored his determination. His eyes tightened, and he looked as if he were trying to decide how to word his next statement. He spoke portentously. I want you to torture her tonight and finish her destruction. You all realize we were here to bewilder her. We must make the best of our situation. Both Grace's mental and physical condition are in our favor. Work hard, and then certainly we will have a celebration in the next few weeks. Once our plan is in motion, we will let them complete their own destruction. This is where our opportunity lays. But we must also be aware. There is danger that either Joe or Grace will discover the truth and change things. We must keep them totally emotional and irrational. Disappointment must be their constant friend. Sizzling words cut through the air and divided the demon's ranks. The thing stood there, motionless again, his eyes burning with anger while his wings slowly came to a standstill. His low, ominous voice was seething with hatred. Rumors have spread that we might not win this competition. If our opponent is hard-hitting, so much more of a thrill the challenge will be. We have the advantage. Grace and Joe are divided. We will keep them busy, criticizing and arguing with each other. Then their hearts will be far from praying. Over the years, we have noted the tones of voice and facial expression they use to irritate one another. Work on that as well. Remind Grace how much she hates Joe's smirky smile and how it makes her feel that he is treating her like a child. Let her assume that he knows how annoying it is and that he is doing it to annoy her. And of course, never let Grace expect that any of her tones or expressions similarly annoy Joe. Grace rushed into the kitchen, the sanctuary where she hoped to find a moment of peace. First, she got out a bottle of her favorite wine and a corkscrew. Her shoulders relaxed a little as she took out a pack of skinless chicken breast from the fridge. Next, she reached for the garlic and onions. Her nerves settled down and no longer danced around her. She did something quick and easy with the rice. The air was pungent with spices. She stir-fried slices of mushrooms and small trees of broccoli. Her face was now relaxed and a little rosy from the heat and wine. She gave the vegetables one last toss and called for Joe. "Honey, it's time for dinner." Grace fixed herself a plate with a considerably smaller portion and came around to sit at the kitchen table beside Joe. Taking another sip of wine from her third glass, she smiled over at him. Taking his first bite, he sat back to consider things. A smirky smile appeared on Joe's face as he was sucked in by the atmosphere. He innocently commented, "You look so tired. Maybe you need some help to get through this." It was Forebodin, standing tall and imposing, with his expansive wings settling at the dinner table. His glowing words were ready to be launched in an attack. A dozen demons accompanied him on either side, almost as malicious as he was. The hot red vapor from their nostrils was already spreading ribbons that drifted around the room. The black, beastly lips pulled back a contemptuous grin, unveiling a long string of obscenities. Forebodin spread his arms with a flourish, then arrogantly sent thoughts to Grace. "It's all Joe's fault. I despise him. Oh, my God, not a smirky smile. He's hideous looking. I should just tell him, yeah, it's all Joe's fault." His insane laughter echoed about the room. With that came an explosion of rushing leathery wings. The demons began whooping and wailing, mocking and spitting, enjoying a moment of victory as every form of love had been vanquished from the room. Under normal circumstances, Joe's words would not have been offensive, but with a smirk on his face and the tone of his voice, such a moment felt like a slap to her face. "Offense? You must see to it that these two fools keep up this game. They must go away from this quarrel convinced that their marriage is in shambles. In no time, Joe will turn his anger towards God as well," bellowed Forebodin. In an instant, she seemed to draw back from him. The moment was over. "You're the one who looks like crap. Leave me alone." It was like a blow from the pit of hell. Joe remained motionless. Grace turned away from him. Is she no longer mine? Is she abandoning me, too? I simply suggested she looked tired. What was wrong with that? Why is Grace so offended? He took a deep breath. He grabbed her wrists and pinned them to her sides. They glowered at each other. Grace pulled away. "My God, you asked for it! You might be contagious," she flatly said. His eyes were intent on her face as he struggled to understand what was happening to their marriage. He stared into her eyes for a long minute. There was no sign of compromise, no hint of indecision in them. "Please," he hopelessly whispered. "All I want to do is try to find a way through this disaster without letting it destroy us." But she didn't answer him. He hesitated in disbelief, stunned to hear her breathing was uneven and she was still angry. "Please," he whispered again. His words tumbled out as he looked at the uncertainty in her eyes. "You don't have to make me any guarantees. Just try to at least be civil. Just let us try, only try, and I will give you what you want," he promised. "This is unbearable. I can't handle this now," she cried. Joe didn't respond. He let her go. Joe wasn't eating. He couldn't even swallow food. He wasn't sleeping. He was down to 150 pounds. At 6'2", when he looked in the mirror, he saw his shadow staring back. It felt like ghosts were haunting him big time, pushing him to the edge of a cliff. 4 spirits were following Joe wherever he went, but not the close companions he wished for. Despair, fear, poverty, and sickness were there to inflict pain and frighten his battered soul. They were there by right, and besides, if Joe only knew the truth, it would set him free. Michael would just have to withhold his power until then. "Why don't you try to put this whole ordeal out of your head for a while? Take a pill and go to bed." "How would you know I've any pills to take?" He smirked. "Take an Ambien and we can talk in the morning." His fists clenched into angry balls. He flinched. Where did that come from? As much as he worried about Grace being in pain, it was nothing like the panic he felt at the idea of not knowing why all the evil was happening to them. A tear ran down his cheek, and he wiped it off with his sleeve. "But how will I erase the stain in my heart? Why is Grace doing this to me? I thought she loved me. All this anger and tears. Should I just give up?" Grace continued to stare at him, but said nothing more, neither then or later that night. Whatever she felt, she kept it to herself. Joe hoped it was because she still loved him. But what could he do? There was nothing he could do. He understood her feelings. In many ways, he shared them. She was shocked at the devastation, but so was he. She got to her feet, swaying a little as the wine sloshed in her head as unsteadily as it did in her glass. Depression and anger, along with her heavy heart, made her think lovingly of the sleeping pills in the medicine cabinet. Those and the anti-anxiety medication were now the threads that made up her security blanket. She prayed that tonight she would be able to sleep without help, but was sure it was unlikely. She told herself she was safe. There wasn't going to be a fire. No one was going to break into their home and murder her in the night. Yet her dreams were now plagued by every fear she had known: fear of dying, fear of loneliness, and fear of disasters. Someone was out there, out in the dark. She could hear him out on the deck, and then the shattering glass. The pain was so fierce she couldn't scream. The black force crushed her against the wall so she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She tried to gasp for air, but the pain was too intense, and her immense fear was even greater. Wild screams, more like feral growls, echoed in her mind. She slapped and kicked at the talons that reached for her. Her eyes flashed open. Her fingers dug into the sheets, and her own breathless screams echoed in her head. Waking in a sweat, she began to sob. She sat shivering and shaking, and hated the person she had become. She wasn't being held under the wave by an unseen force. She wasn't racing towards certain death. Just a dream, just a panic dream. Regulating her breathing, she lay very still and tried to reorient herself. Her alarm began to play Stronger, What Doesn't Kill You by Kelly Clarkson. For a moment, she remembered none of it. When it flooded back, Grace wanted nothing more than to yank the quilt over her head and dive back into oblivion. How would she get through the day, face anyone? She wanted to slink out of town. Demons ruthlessly planted evil thoughts in her mind. Exciting her feelings and evil imagination, all kinds of vile and unclean thoughts came to her. They were the kinds that caused divorce, hatred, jealousy, murder, betrayal, and suicide. Their assignment was to frustrate, to conquer, and ultimately destroy Joe. Grace felt as if she was having something place its hands about her head and force her under a spell. Gargoyling and hissing vicious, filthy, and lustful desires. Their ambition was to get Joe's wife to act contrarily to her redemptive nature. Her soul was at their mercy, open to a merciless attach. There was no way that she would be praying today. Aren't the little cartoons funny that depict little demons putting pictures into humans' minds? But really, demons' best work is done by keeping God's promises out. It is an amusing pastime to make humans think that these promises will only come true when they reach their final destination, heaven. Then they remain helpless, trapped in the sludge of hatred, regret, unhappiness, and fear. Grace propped herself up on an elbow, waiting to see if her stomach would hold, then sat up. There was her favorite insulated mug in the nightstand. Baffled, she picked it up, slid back the tab, and sniffed her coffee. Joe couldn't sleep, so he had gone downstairs to let Grace sleep. He brewed a pot of Irish cream coffee, Grace's favorite, and left it so it would be close and warm when she woke. If he had recited a Robert Burns poem with a Scottish accent while showering her with red roses, she couldn't have been more touched. She'd said horrible things to him, had behaved like a monster, and Joe had made her coffee. She sipped it and let it slide and soothe her abused stomach. Too much wine always left her feeling that way. Because she could hear him down in the kitchen, she squeezed her eyes shut to help gather some courage. A little stressed, she got up to face the music. In the dark corner of the kitchen, the little demon lingered, waiting for Grace's arrival. His drooping face was spread with an unsightly, drooling grin that revealed his fangs as he cackled in demonic delight. And then, as she entered the room, his words brought agonizing, heart-wrenching fear to her mind. Her heart raced. The room suddenly seemed unwelcoming and strangely quiet. She looked around the room with curious eyes, wondering where the feelings were coming from. Whether illusion or reality, she accepted them as they surged at her. Joe glanced at her as she entered the kitchen and smiled sweetly. "Hope you were feeling better today." She wouldn't have been annoyed by the statement itself, not in the least. But he grinned while he asked. Funny, she thought, how many times that expression would have made her happy, but somehow today it only irritated her. She felt he was smirking, laughing at her juvenile behavior. "Thanks for the coffee," she said smugly. He stayed quiet, waiting and realizing she was still angry. "It's not my job to make you happy and cover up all your mistakes," she snapped at him. Why did I marry him? Was it really a contract I can't break? One that has trapped me with no way out? Honestly, I've already paid enough. Joe tried to reason with her, but it was useless. "Grace, don't you think I understand?" he cried. "When we first fell in love, the skies opened, everything seemed possible. But out of nowhere it seems that evil forces are at work in our world, and all I'm trying to do is protect you from them." She listened to him, but when he finished, she appeared restive. "Do you think it matters now, after all that has happened?" She blinked back tears. The sadness echoed in her voice. "Do you think I care whether it's fair, or whether it is your dream to have us back the way we